Hi, I'm going to give you an example today of why it's not very wise to use more complexity to explain complexity. The example I'll use in a moment is not perfect. Many of you will probably cry, "Strawman!" And in a certain sense it is a straw man, but the point, the idea, the concept behind the example is probably more than correct. So this is why it's not very smart to try to explain complexity with more complexity. This is a TV from somewhere around the 80s, and as you can see, it's complex. It's a complex piece of machinery. Now, according to the idea of explaining more complexity with, or explaining some complexity with even more complexity, this is a more complex TV. So by definition of those who think that you need more complexity to explain complexity, this must have come before this. This is a result of this, not the other way around. Now think about it. We can't explain, but we can complain. We can't explain complex organisms with more complex organisms. We need to look backwards to see its roots. Where does it come from? Is there a natural way to explain this complexity? Is there a natural process that is taking place to explain the complexity? When it comes to biology, yes, there is. When it comes to mechanical things like TVs, no, there isn't. But the concept behind complexity, explaining complexity, you can use it as an example with the TVs. Another interesting part here is the discussion of kinds. Creationist always talks about kinds, even though nobody knows what it really means because it's never been defined. You really need to define the word kinds if you want to talk about it. Because think about it, they are actually both kinds of TVs. But one is a CRT TV, the other one is an LCD TV. They're using completely different technologies and works in completely different ways, but the end result is kind of the same. They display images, even though they are technology-wise, they are very far removed from each other. You can think about this as the eye as well. You want to say, how could the eye form by itself? But if you look back and follow how the eye has evolved throughout nature, things that we can actually observe, then it makes sense to explain complexity that has evolved from simplicity. Just as the first TV was very simple, it has evolved into a more and more complex thing. But the TV today is not like the TV was before, just like old eyes were not like the eyes we have today. And if you talk about kind and can't distinguish between kind, you might be able to say that the old TV is not of the same kind as the new TV because they use totally different technologies. But if you look at the eye, and if you draw that out to talk about the eye in this case, then you also have to say that if the eye of a deer, for example, is completely different from the human eye, or that they couldn't have the same origin or the same ancestor, then it's really difficult to explain this thing from a God standpoint, because then the creationer had the creation thingy, God thingy, had to make one type of eye for a deer or a monkey or an ape that is completely different from the human eye. But they're not. They kind of work the same way. So it really doesn't make much sense to talk about complexity, explaining complexity. You need to look at simplicity evolving into complexity. And we see it all the time. And it's the only thing that makes sense.